Good afternoon. My name is Clay Mann. I am the Principal Investigator for the NEMSIS Technical Assistance Center, currently housed at the University of Utah School of Medicine in the Department of Pediatrics. I have been asked to do a brief recording, about 20 minutes, of a presentation that was given to the NESEMSO Board of Directors in October of this year that dealt with future NEMSIS versioning and adding some clarity to that process. So I'm going to run through a number of slides to help folks understand where we're going with versions 3.3.4 and 3.4. And as folks know, there's a move towards an additional update to those revisions, version 3.5.0. Let's begin our discussion perhaps by just laying out an agenda. I want to make sure that everybody kind of understands the facts associated with the issues that were found in version 2, how we attempted to fix those issues in version 3.3.4 and 3.4.0, why we're talking about the potential of moving to a 3.5.0, and then maybe talking about the current timelines for each of these versions. Let's begin by talking a little bit about version 2. Clearly, in a lot of directions or aspects of the version 2 standard, it was broken. One of the issues that was paramount to this issue was the fact that often element values were incomplete. For example, incident location really only had 12 choices as to where the EMS incident was occurring, and lots of locations were left off of that. Also, it was not possible to record a pertinent negative, and so, for example, if an EMS provider was treating a patient with chest pain and did not give aspirin because the patient had already taken an aspirin, there was no way for them to be able to record that. The V2 dataset was really built for epidemiological reasons, kind of for counting things and being able to describe what EMS is, but it really fell short in our ability to look at the performance of providers. And so V3 kind of really worked to fix that. The data set was not timely. Data came to states or to the national repository like on a quarterly basis or longer. We could do a lot better in regards to timeliness of making the data available. And the data set was homegrown. It really was an XML structure that was just built here at the University of Utah, and it really was not recognized in a national standard, and that would bring great benefits if we could kind of introduce the standard as an ANSI approved or national standard. So that was really the purpose of NEMSIS version 3, right? To improve the data quality, to improve the data structure, add some business intelligence, some validity rules to kind of increase the accuracy of the data, enhance performance assessments, so really include some elements that could speak to agency or provider performance, have real-time data submission and data acquisition by the state and by the national repositories. That would be wonderful. And then to move the NEMSIS standard into a national standard through Health Level 7, and so that we could synchronize our work with other clinical standards that are used in the hospital, for example. Well, let's take a look at really how well have we done with these topics with version 3, 3.3.4 and 3.4.0, the versions that are out there. So in regards to data quality, some real pros. We have included pertinent negatives. You can see some here on the snapshot for medications. Those have been really successful, I think. We have implemented business rules. For the most part, those have been successful. They can get a little cumbersome. We'll get better at that through time, but I think we've done a good job of that. One of the cons is that, for example, the elements in version 2 that had these truncated lists of value choices, we decided to open up those lists completely and to use national value standards to fill those elements. So, for example, incident location has gone from 12 possible values to hundreds and hundreds of values using ICD-10-CM. And that really hasn't worked real well. We've had real difficulties with that. The way that we tried to fix that in 3.3.4 and 3.4.0, the fact that there was hundreds of choices, was the NEMSIS TAC worked with lots of stakeholders to develop suggested lists for each of these. I think there were 19 elements that we're going to be using these national standard lists. So we tried to develop suggested lists. And so here's the one for incident location type, and it's only showing a small part of this overall list. But we attempted to take all those ICD-10 codes that could be used. There were hundreds and hundreds, and try to organize them into certain sites and certain locations within those sites, and reduce that list that's available in ICD-10. Some states have implemented this, others have not. It really hasn't turned out to be a good solution as a suggested list, and many providers are left with having to make just these very complex choices trying to find the answers to these elements. Let's take a hard look at performance assessment. Version 2 to version 3 added these additional elements you can see here, all specifically related to provider and performance. Great to have them in there. I think the downside of this, the con, was that these were all national elements, which means that they have to be completed on every record. And so this has just added additional time and resources to be able to complete a record. How about data transfer? So we have automated that using web services, and we're looking at the time from closing a record in a patient's home until arrival through the state into the national repository here at the University of Utah really is about 7 minutes. So incredibly fast turnaround on populating our state and national databases. Just really, really good work done there. One of the advantages of this was that states can see, with this being such a real-time repository, using it for record tracking, so to track incidents, personnel, or resources through time. The standard really isn't set up to do that very well because you can't track people really well with the existing elements. So though this would work out well for states as it's currently structured, it will not work very well for that purpose. What about trying to make the NEMSIS standard more of a national approved standard? We have accomplished that through Health Level 7. So we're now ANSI approved as a national standard, which is really a plus for us and should lead to future funding. But the cons of that is that we had to use national standard vocabulary lists, and they just are not working for EMS. So ICD-10, CM, SNOMED, LOINC, RX norm for medications, just really cumbersome for EMS to use. And also, even though we have an ANSI approved standard now, we really haven't made great strides in being able to have our data accepted into hospitals and to actually receive patient outcomes back through Center for Medicare and Medicaid CMS-approved templates. It just hasn't worked really well, and there's some more work that we could accomplish there. So why would we consider a version 3.5.0 moving and developing a new standard? We're really 3.3.4 and 3.4.0 were really the first version 3 standards that were used in the field. So we now have about 2 years of experience with these two standards in the field, and EMS providers are telling us basically 3 important things. One is, wow, there's just too many elements. All these national elements are mandatory. I have to complete them for every record. The 18 elements that contain some type of a national value standard or vocabulary, wow, it's just really complicated to use. ICD-10 CM, for example, is very complicated. And there are elements that just remain confusing. E-disposition 12 tries to define a number of different dispositions, patient disposition, the transport disposition, all in one element, and it's really, really hard to use. State users, as I mentioned, they just can't track their submissions or personnel, and data exchange just isn't happening like we'd like it to. Well, this past summer, we organized a number of summer work groups to try to address these issues. And so we had a group that reviewed the national elements. This speaks to the EMS providers' comments that there's just too many elements. Are there some that should be removed? There was a work group associated with the suggested list, the complicated list from those national vocabularies. Should we make the suggested list shorter and make them defined lists? And so everybody sees them. Just like they did under version 2, you would just see a EMS-friendly term, but have more terms than under version 2, so that's not such a truncated list. And could we split e-disposition 12? It's so confusing. There's too many concepts here. Also, a work group to look at introducing a unique universal ID that would kind of deal with that tracking at the state level? And then also, could we modify the e-outcome section of the NEMSIS standard? That's where data comes back from the hospital in the EMS record. Try to make that cleaner so exchange is easier. Well, when you're talking about any of these potential changes, these summer work groups were asked to utilize kind of a cost-benefit assessment, right? When they're looking at, do we really want to make this change? Is it something that will be valuable? What are the costs? And so the costs are clearly, there'll be more time and effort associated with developing a new standard and implementing a new standard, probably additional training at the state and agency levels, new materials, new training materials will need to be developed. There'll be additional cost. There's probably also legislative changes that need to be made in some states, and just the costs associated with setup. Well, what could actually balance that out would be benefits, right? So if making the product more clear to our EMS providers, making it so they can finish the record quicker, and making it so the record flows more in kind of harmony with an incident flow, those would be the benefits that we could accomplish. And then we would just have to determine, is that ratio, that assessment, cost to benefit worth it? Well, so let's take a look at the work that was completed by these summer work groups. So 2 of the groups were dealing with issues that are really under the hood of the NEMSIS standard. These would not affect the way EMS providers collect data or really any of the training that would need to happen at the state level. One was the universally unique ID. That just kind of sits underneath the hood and really wouldn't affect the way that data is collected or stored or used. So probably the cost is pretty low, and the benefit could be quite high. Patient outcomes, again, these are elements that come from the hospital back into the EMS record, so it doesn't affect how providers collect data. It really doesn't affect how data is stored. So they are moving forward with our own kind of industry-defined template. If we implement this change in 3.5.0, really, again, the cost is low. In regards to that list that I provided, the benefit can be quite high, I think. What about the issue of too much time? And so looking at the national elements, this work group really decided that we could demote 15 elements from a national status to a lower status so they wouldn't have to be collected on each record. But there are 3 that weren't national elements that probably need to be promoted, and those are listed here. So kind of overall, there would be a reduction in 12 elements that needed to be completed on every record. So here I think the cost, there will be some education probably here, but I think the costs are low. We're not adding things. We're trying to remove things. So I think the benefit to our providers is high, so probably the benefit outweighs the cost here. What about these suggested lists? So the work group associated with this area indicated that for 13 elements that are using these complex kind of national vocabularies, we could convert those to a defined, truncated list that EMS providers could just go through this very defined list and not have to just have this pattern that allows so many choices. There are 3 elements that have to remain patterns. That is, they can use a lot of different codes in the standard, and these are all related to history, right? So a patient could have any kind of allergies, they could have any kind of history, they could have any kind of current medications they're taking, and so it's really hard to come up with a defined list for those 3 elements. So the cost of this, there will be more education. Things are not getting more complex, they're getting easier, so I think that the costs are probably lower than the benefits, really clarifying, making it easier for an EMS provider to complete a record by just looking through a list, a logical list. And then finally, e-disposition 12 groups. So splitting that, their proposal is splitting that into 3 elements. And so now we'll have a clear understanding of patient disposition, incident disposition, and transport disposition into 3 elements rather than our poor providers trying to work through e-disposition 12 to answer all 3 concepts in one question. The cost to making this change, implementing this into 3 elements, is high, right? Because a lot of the business rules are associated with e-disposition 12. There's a lot that rests on this element, so cutting it up will really require a lot of retooling, a lot of training, but there's probably real benefit here too to the EMS provider, making it easier for them to complete the disposition of a record. So again, that one will require some additional costs, I think. So that was the work of the summer work groups. There were 118 additional revision requests that didn't fall under the purview of any of those groups. They'll be that have been submitted to us over the course of about 3 years since V3's been in the street. So providers or others have been finding issues, and these will be considered for the 3.5 revision. Here's kind of an example. I changed to E-Exam 19 mental status assessment. We used to have both sedated and paralyzed combined into one value. We would deprecate or remove that element and replace it with, or that value, and replace it with two values, separating out a patient being paralyzed or sedated. This would be a value. We asked an expert panel whether or not they think this would be a valuable change, and the bulk of folks indicated yes. Let's look at some other types of revisions that are in this 118. Some of them are related to making the COMPASS project work, and so there's clearly changes in the standard that would need to be made to make sure that COMPASS could be used effectively. There's been a number of suggested revisions that are related to the opioid issue that we're facing in this country. Here, for example, in the element that indicates the role or type of person that administered medication, we used to have patient and layperson together. Those need to be separated out for us to take a close look at opioid use and Narcan administration. And so we would change and add these values. You can see here, again, the expert panel thought that this would be a value. Some of the changes are easy, just really misspellings. Here we misspelled AVPU in the underlying structure of the standard. So a really easy change to make. Some of the changes will be harder. For example, here was a change that was requested to add a lot of new elements to the dPersonnel section, and the expert panel has declined to even accept this recommendation. So we'll continue to work through these 118 requests for changes with great transparency, making sure that state data managers and state directors understand what those suggested changes are and what the decisions are made regarding those. So that gives you a good idea of why we're thinking about a 3.5 revision and what would be contained in it. Let's talk a little bit about versioning. So there has been, I think, some misconceptions about the timeline for 3.3.4 and 3.4.0, and there has been a proposal to extend those slightly. So here at the top of this blue timeline is the 3.3.4 lifespan, and on the bottom is the 3.4.0 lifespan. So you can see that we're proposing extending 3.3.4 1 year and extending 3.4.0 for 2 years. So in essence, 3.3.4 will have been open for use in the states for 3 months shy of 5 years, and the 3.4.0 standard will be open for 3 months shy of 7 years. So clearly, those have been long-lasting standards that have served us well. Well, what would happen with 3.5.0? Here's the proposed timeline for that. We would finalize all of these revision requests by May of next year, and have a candidate release out by December of 2018. Software would be releasing, our vendors would be releasing 3.5.0 software in about 2020, and we'd love to see the majority of folks moved to 3.5.0 by 2021. So a pretty extended timeline gives us lots of time to make sure that the training necessary at states and the implementation by vendors can be tested and ensure that it's working well with this extended timeline. So really, I just wanted to show this just real briefly in the last minute we have on this presentation. This kind of shows how quickly states are moving to the new standards, and so the blue line is version 2. The pink line was proposed for version 3. The red dotted line is where we actually are. The x-axis is years since the standard has been released, V2 and V3, and the y-axis is the number of states and territories that have made the migration. So you can see that by the end of 2017, we'll have 30 states that have migrated to the V3 standard, clearly ahead of what had happened in regards to migration to version 2. Not as good as we had proposed would happen, but clearly good progress is being made. So I just want to end this presentation thanking you for your time to better understand the NEMSIS versioning plan that's in place. If you have any questions related to this or any comments that you'd like to share with the NEMSIS TAC staff, please feel free to go to our website at www.nemsis.org, and our call-in information is available there. We'd love to talk to you about any thoughts that you might have in regards to this revision process, and we'll continue to hopefully work with you and others in your state as we talk about this move to version 3.5.0. Thank you very much for your time.